My name is Joe Lawhorn. I'm a student at Texas A&M in the Marriage and Family Therapy program. I'll be talking about solution-focused brief therapy. And if I had to describe it in one sentence, I would say that our future always follows our focus. And so if you want a different future, it requires a different focus. Well, first of all, I think that most solution-focused therapists, they tend to be warm and engaging personalities to begin with. They're friendly, and they generally tend to see the positives in other people and of life. So that's a helpful characteristic. And I think what motivates them is when they're dealing with clients and helping people, they notice that one of the theories of dysfunction for this particular model is that people tend to get stuck. Their thinking becomes patterned toward problems, and sometimes all they need is a little shift to get them thinking in a new direction, to see other circumstances in their life when the problem doesn't really exist there. So individuals and families, they use unsatisfactory ways of dealing with the problem, and so their patterns kind of become stuck. And what the solution-focused therapist tries to do is to get the client to work collaboratively to come up with solutions to the problem rather than being stuck on the problem. I like that it's questions, and I like that it's collaborative, and I like that it's working with the client to come up with solutions to their own problem. I also appreciate the fact that one of the theories of this approach that motivates it is that the client, him or herself, has the answers to the problems with which they're dealing. For me personally, there's also a spiritual component to this. Because solution-focused is forward in its thinking, it actually aligns very well with the scripture. I'm a Christian pastor and a Christian therapist, and the Bible that I read informs me that we have a God who's very future-oriented. For example, there are several places in the scripture where God talks about, "I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord." Future focus. He renews my life, it says in another passage. He makes all things new. Forget what lies behind, St. Paul said, and instead press on toward the goal. So there's this idea, there's this concept in Scripture that's very future focused, and so we have a God who's oriented toward the future. So I think solution-focused therapy aligns quite well with my spiritual beliefs. And I also appreciate about this approach, what I like to tell clients is, if you want to experience something that you've never experienced, if you want to have something that you've never had, it's going to require you to do something that you've never done. And that's really true, and I think that's perfect for the solution-focused model. And some of the guiding assumptions about this model really resonate with me also. And again, I go back to the scriptural aspect of it, that I know that God created this client, this person, this individual, this family. They're made in His image, and God is active in the life of the client. I also appreciate about this approach that complex problems don't necessarily require complex solutions. For example, if we're focused on the future, even one little shift in action or behavior or thinking can alter for the positive the very trajectory of a person's life. So I do appreciate that. And I also appreciate about solution-focused that finding exceptions helps to create these solutions. And again, I go back to one of my original statements that the theory of dysfunction is that people become so fixated on what the problem is in their life that they discount the fact that that problem does not exist 24 hours a day or 7 days a week in their life, that there are in fact situations or circumstances where the problem is either non-existent or non-occurring, or that it's occurring less, that it's not quite as big a problem. And so this collaborative enterprise of working with a person to identify when these exceptions, as we call them, are occurring, actually helps to draw out strengths, actually helps to draw out positives, and it actually does something in the human mind for the client where if they just get a little nudge from the solution-focused therapist to say, see, this problem isn't happening all the time. So when it's not happening, or when it's happening less, what do you notice that's different about the circumstances, about the situation as it's happening externally around you? But not only that, when you're not experiencing this problem quite as drastically, or not at all, what do you notice that's different about you? What do you notice about your thoughts? What are you thinking? What do you notice about your emotions? What are you feeling when the problem isn't happening? And so it kind of lights up the client's brain and confirms for them and kind of reinforces the idea there are times when I don't have this problem or have it so drastically. Whatever's happening in that moment, do more of that. And so it gets back to this future orientation and this positive outlook. And then also what I like about solution-focused therapy is it's very intentionally question-based in terms of therapy and in terms of dialogue. And I appreciate that because instead of the stance of the therapist being directive or seen as the answer man, where I'm telling you what the answer is or what the solution is, solution-focused really leans heavily on the effective use of questioning to promote a change in thinking in the client so that it becomes more dialogical instead of monological, where the therapist is the one doing all the talking. Instead, it's the client, and it's collaborative, and it's dialogical, and we're having a discourse. And by my use of strategic and intentional thinking, I'm asking you questions that are focused on getting you to think about positive things and strengths and exceptions. And it's a line of questioning that promotes and prompts envisioning for yourself a better future. And when that happens through that process of questioning, the client actually comes up with the answers him or herself by answering and thinking through some of these questions, if that makes any kind of sense. And what's great about that is that when the answer or the solution to a particular problem or situation comes from within the client, as we all know, the client is far more likely to own that answer, him or herself, and then to install whatever new lines of thinking, emoting, or behaving are required to support that answer. And I also like that the client is not the problem, but in fact the problem is the problem. I really appreciate that assumption about solution-focused therapy. Most commonly, for those who might be antagonistic against this particular approach, it can be viewed as too easy, too simple, because a lot of therapists might have the idea that, well, it can't just be about the problem that's being presented. There are other things, there are other factors, and so there are those out there who might criticize solution-focused therapy as being too simplistic. Or even another term that I've heard folks use is that it's not really, it's a Band-Aid fix, if you will. It doesn't really get at the heart of the issues or the deeper concerns or the deeper factors in a person's life that's actually contributing to the problem. That solution-focused therapy, it really is just a Band-Aid to put on something that's much, much deeper. And along those same lines, there are those who think that because it doesn't get at some of those, or the thinking is that because it doesn't address deeper issues, emotional wounds of the past, or family of origin issues, or things like of that nature, that this particular model wouldn't be as effective with what might be considered serious problems like suicidology or suicide ideations or prompts or things like traumatic experiences. And kind of tied to that myth, if you will, or misconception about solution-focused therapy is the idea that any type of discussion in the therapy session about some of those issues, that the solution-focused therapist is really quick to shut that down, that they don't make allowance for any of those kinds of discussions in the therapy room. And I would say that's just not true. And of course, I can't speak for every solution-focused therapist out there, but for me, speaking personally, and especially in those early stages when I'm really attempting to join with the client and to get to know them and to hear their story, hearing their story is very important to me. And so I do make allowance for talk of things like grief and anger or relationship issues. The truth is that, in my view, solution-focused therapists do care about and want to understand a client, the presenting concerns, and they do allow and encourage the client to tell their story. And I think that there's many benefits that come out of that. We want our clients to feel heard and to feel understood. And that's important even in solution-focused therapy.